I believe this is a message to be sound all over Africa, that this is a time for change. We don't need dictatorship anymore. We need democracy.
The chief of the Gambian army says he's received the keys to the State House and he's waiting for the arrival of the nation's new president, Adama Barrow. The situation puts the army leader temporarily in charge of the country. He says he still doesn't know when President Barrow will return to Gambia from Senegal. Barrow says he'll be forming a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to look into the abuses of President Yahya Jammeh's government. The former president went into exile over the weekend. Jammeh lost to Barrow in elections last December, but initially refused to step down. The Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, brokered negotiations that led to Jammeh's decision to relinquish power.
Whatever they are doing, we don't know. Even our friends, our neighbors coming in, I'm not informed. As we speak, I'm in charge of this country today because Barrow, my president, is in Senegal. Whatever is coming to this country, I must, not should or will, I must be informed. But I'm keeping the dark. All this is to cause confusion, to spoil the show. Nobody can spoil this show for Barrow.
Gambia's ex-ruler Yahya Jammeh stands accused of stealing over $11 million worth of cash from state coffers before flying into exile at the weekend. Luxury goods are also said to have been flown out, according to an advisor to new President Adama Barrow.
Within the period of 2 weeks alone, nearly $500 million were withdrawn by the former president. That's a lot of money.
President Barrow was sworn into office in neighbouring Senegal amid the political standoff that followed his victory in December's election. After more than 2 decades in power in Gambia, Jammeh had refused to accept defeat, and only mediation by African leaders, as well as the threat of force, convinced him to end his iron rule in the impoverished country. A West African regional military force has entered the capital city of Banjul, paving the way for President Barrow's arrival, a prospect that sparked celebrations in the streets and the return of many of those who'd fled amid fears of unrest. Thousands of Gambians have sought asylum abroad over the years, with their longtime ruler accused by rights groups of jailing, torturing and killing his political opponents.
On Gambian soil, West African troops arrived to ensure stability following Yahya Jammeh's departure. Their presence has opened the floodgate of refugees eager to return home. The young and the elderly, all wanting to get on the next available boat home. It's a long wait and tense, with occasional scuffles. For those lucky to get on board, they aren't sure of what they will encounter on the other side. Lamin Nicol, caught up in the crisis, got out and saw his mother across the border and is going back.
The past 72 hours was my longest days. I've never lived an experience like this.
But many others are lining up to get on board.
Hundreds of Gambians and other foreign nationals are able to make it on this ferry. Thousands more remain in the town of Barra, trying to get across the water into Banjul and beyond, to their homes, to their businesses and their offices, after Yahya Jammeh left the Gambia and went into exile on Saturday night. They are among the 45,000 people the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees said have fled Gambia because of the political crisis there.
Boubacar Kuka has returned to Banjul with his 2 children.
People have to run away with their kids because we don't know what fighting is. We don't know war. We always saw it on TV. We feel very sad about it.
Sheriff Bojang Jr., an exiled journalist, set his foot in Gambia for the first time in 15 years. He sneaked into Banjul hours before Jammeh's departure.
When I arrived in Banjul, I couldn't believe it. I was so excited. I was so pleased that finally I'm home. I longed for this. I waited and waited and waited for this. But then there is another part of this story which is emotional. I was, and I still am a bit sad. Nothing makes sense to me.
Many refugees have returned home, but thousands of others are staying away, at least for now. They want to see greater stability before risking the journey back. Ahmed Idris, Al Jazeera, Banjul, Gambia.
Well, West African troops have crossed into Gambia's border to secure the arrival of the country's President Adama Barrow from Senegal. A Senegalese army official says the soldiers entered the country to control the strategic points to ensure the safety of the population and to facilitate Barrow's assumption of his role. President Barrow had said that he would return to Gambia once a security sweep is complete. The UN Security Council on Thursday voted on a draft resolution to ensure a transfer of power in the African state. The defeated president flew to Guinea following the decision with an extraordinary set of assurances from the international community. Now turning to London, joined by Mr. Ayo Johnson, African Affairs Analyst. Thank you so much for being with us. Well, is this a successful situation that has taken place? It seems that the transition is in order. Former Gambian president on his way out and the new one in. How do you evaluate it?
Well, I think it's been a huge success for the African Union and ECOWAS. Clearly, we had a very difficult situation in the Gambia. As you just said, a sitting president of Yahya Jammeh, who was asked to leave and he didn't want to do so, and ultimately he had to be pushed out and at the expense, and of course more successfully so, for Mr. Barrow, who's going to take over that reign. Yes, for the African Union at least, it's been no bloodshed, there's been no damage to property or life, and from that perspective it ticks all the boxes. But there's some crucial issues yet to be determined, whether the African Union, as has been shown previously, would go after the Mr. Yahya Jammeh for crimes. Again, he's been there for 22 years worth of enemies, 22 years worth of issues which many international observers would say were not in keeping with those standards. And of course, we've seen previously where presidents like President Charles Taylor of Liberia at the time, when he went into exile in then Nigeria, ultimately he was handed over to the International Criminal Court and is now languishing in a prison. So these are some of the concerns that will be facing Mr. Yahya Jammeh as he leaves the country. All sorts of issues have been said. He might be going to Morocco, others say Equatorial Guinea. As we know, Equatorial Guinea is not one of the signatories to the International Criminal Court. So that said, he will be very safe.
And prognosis now inside of the country, now that the former president has gone. Do you think that it's going to be a calm transition from basically one administration that was in place for 22 years and now with this new administration coming in?
Well, yes, when you've had an administration that's been in power for so long, you can expect that the fabrics of the society, especially from a governance perspective, are intertwined with that system. So dislodging it, changing it will be a huge challenge for Mr. Barrow. As we do know, he's not a man with political experience. He himself was not too long ago living in the UK and of course went back as a property developer, and ultimately the opportunities for him leading his country has come. So he would have huge challenges. He would expect to have some good people around him who would help him to usher him through this change.
And are you optimistic with a person, as you said, who does not have experience politically, actually taking the reins of this country after being in the hands of another administration for more than 2 decades?
Well, Gambians have spoken. They've spoken in larger numbers to say they wanted change. 22 years was a time of length which they were not prepared to accept. But we must say, despite the fact that Mr. Yahya Jammeh has the notion, as people would expect and say, that he ruled with an iron fist, Gambia has been pretty quiet, pretty calm. And in fact, that level of tranquility that they've experienced over the last 22 years, be it, as many people will say, with an iron fist, has meant that tourism, which is a huge draw for that country, has been pretty up. Many Westerners have gone to that country to visit in large numbers, and there will be Gambians will be wishing that that continues, if not in the short term, at least in the medium to long term.
All right, thank you so much for being with us, Mr. Ayo Johnson, African Affairs Analyst out of London.
A warm welcome. You're watching Eye on Africa. I'm Rochelle Ferguson-Biahi. These are the stories on the continent this evening. Gambia's Yahya Jammeh agrees to cede power. This, according to his successor, Adama Barrow. It comes after weeks of uncertainty over Jammeh's rejection of election results last December. We head to Senegal, to the border town of Karang, where thousands of Gambians have fled amid political uncertainty. We get the latest from our correspondent there. Gambia's leader, Yahya Jammeh, has agreed to cede power and leave the country. This according to his elected successor, Adama Barrow. Well, the news, which is yet to be confirmed by Jammeh himself, comes following weeks of uncertainty over his refusal to accept defeat in elections last December. Well, earlier this Friday, regional leaders held 11th hour talks with Jammeh to persuade him to hand over power peacefully. This came as troops from 5 West African nations stood at the ready to intervene if no deal was reached. Lauren Bursticker reports.
Breathing a sigh of relief, Yahya Jammeh stepped down as president of the Gambia Friday.
Crowds gathered outside the presidential compound on Sunday night, awaiting the return of their new leader, Adama Barrow. Earlier, Senegalese troops were greeted with cheers as they entered the capital, Banjul. They were deployed as part of the West African regional bloc of ECOWAS nations. Barrow spoke exclusively to France 24 from where he had been seeking safety in Senegal.
You all know you have ECOMOG forces who are already, ECOWAS forces already in Banjul. And they have to give us clearance to leave Dakar, go back to Banjul. We are waiting for that clearance.
Hundreds of Gambians returned to the country on Sunday. Over 45,000 had fled in fear of potential violence as the crisis over former leader Yahya Jammeh reached a head. But now their dictator of 22 years has gone. Barrow's special advisor claims Jammeh made off with the equivalent of 10 million euros from the state coffers and shipped out luxury vehicles by cargo plane.
Within the period of 2 weeks alone, nearly $500 million were withdrawn by the former president, the government of the former president. Within 2 weeks, nearly $500 million. That's a lot of money.
Jammeh flew out of Banjul on Saturday evening. He was set to go to Equatorial Guinea, where their president Teodoro Obiang, who himself has been in power since 1979, is to grant him political exile.